Oh god. Oh god, oh no. Oh, I was cleaning out my collection of swords and I dropped my sword with sentience on Bowser's castle. My sentient sword is now piercing Bowser's cat. I gotta get out of here before Mario finds. I gotta go. Super Duper Mario. I was bound to loop back around to the Mushroom Kingdom sooner or later. I wasn't exactly sure when. I considered doing a Mario 64 video since I've never technically beaten it. Or maybe I'd play the Game Boy games and eventually lead to Wario Land. There's plenty of options to choose from when it comes to the Gabagool Gladiators, so much so that it's hard to choose where to go next. Thankfully, this time I didn't really have to choose, because the insane folk at Nintendo just decided to remake a game out of nowhere. Super Mario RPG. I've had this game on my radar for years now, hearing how it's one of the best RPGs ever made. And honestly, I hear it's one of the best games on the SNES, if not in general, one of the best games ever. What kind of drugs were they on that they just were able to keep pumping out perfect game after perfect game all this time? Psst, it's cocaine. It's the one trade secret they don't want you to know. Oh god, Nintendo found me. Oh god. Alright, but let's be honest, Super Mario RPG by all accounts is a game that should absolutely not exist. Like, not at all. The fact that it does is an anomaly. Call me crazy, but my first thought when looking at this Italian lawn gnome isn't, yeah, you know what? Give this guy some experience points and equipment slots. Michael Mouse, arguably the most recognizable mascot in the world, doesn't even have an attraction based on his RPG franchise, and he's the king of amusement parks. You know, it's a shame a certain blue rodent doesn't have an RPG. Maybe he'd have an amusement park by now, too. Hey, get out of here! I said it's a shame he doesn't have an RPG. It's impossible to avoid Mario. You can't escape from a plumber. They know exactly where you shit. But even beyond that, if something can play video games even barely, someone's gonna find a way to put Mario on it, even if it's not the, most legal version. I mean, he's been everywhere from kart racing to soccer games, even in the Olympics. Like, this guy can do it all. Don't say his name this early into the video, guard. Please have some self-respect for yourself. When you're branching your franchise out, finding success in just about every avenue you explore, I suppose an outcome like this is inevitable. Go figure when you've got the wild and imaginative mind like Shigeru Miyamoto running the show that this was rattling around in there somewhere. In a 1995 interview with Game On magazine, Miyamoto explained, "Long before Super Mario RPG got started, I had talked with the staff at Nintendo about wanting to make an RPG that featured Mario. One day we were talking with Square and they revealed that they wanted to create an RPG that would have worldwide appeal." Hey, so like, what is it with Square and taking other people's IP and turning them into RPGs? Like, when are we getting the SpongeBob and Dragon crossover everyone is just clamoring for? At the time, I could only imagine how people might have reacted to the idea. They were still in the SNES and hadn't expanded the Mario world from 2D side-scrolling. Sure, there was some karting in, but even some of the side games that would explore Mario's world were still platformers. Wario Land, Yoshi's Island, even Donkey Kong Country if you want to count those. You had different worlds and technically kingdoms, but making an entire RPG out of it, well, that's just silly. And yet, here we are almost 30 years later. As someone who claims to love RPGs, it's almost blasphemous that I've never been able to play this one until now. There's only two things I know about Super Mario RPG. One, it has a banger victory theme that makes for a pretty fucking funny meme if I'm honest with you. And two, it has a very, very important character that people have been obsessing over for almost 30 years now. And when I say massive, I mean they can't stop talking about this dude. I'm of course talking about Big Yoshi. Geno, the character people haven't stopped harassing Sakurai to put into Smash for the last 20 years. And I get it, he's a pretty cool character, and I'll get to my opinions on him later down the video. Needless to say, it's almost a disservice to myself that I haven't played this game, considering how high of a pedigree it has in the overall gaming landscape. When I think about RPGs that I enjoy, I think there's only two criteria that I look for. First, I have to click with the story and the characters. If you're going to be spending 40 plus hours on average running around with a set group of characters, you gotta tell a story that keeps me invested. There's dozens, hundreds of RPGs out there that drop the ball when it comes to basic story and that just lost me in the first act. The second criteria I try to keep in mind is how the game allows me to interact with the world, combat included. How much of the world do I really get to explore? What kind of characters and towns can I visit? Things like that. Does the combat system try to do anything unique or interesting, or is it simply just picking a specific attack out of a menu? It's a bit more open-ended than just, I like story, so game good, because a game can try many different things with its gameplay. I love Kingdom Hearts for different reasons than I love Persona, for example, even if they both have the insane story nailed down to a T. Oh god, I'm realizing how many of the cringe franchises I enjoy, Lord help me. Even knowing how highly regarded the game is, I still worry how much this is going to feel like a Mario RPG. I've played a bit of the Paper Mario series, and I've beaten most of the Mario and Luigi games, but even then, there are still times where it feels less like a Mario RPG and more just a general RPG with Mario sprites and characters in it, if that makes any sort of sense. I understand you have to make some creative liberty decisions when it comes to making an RPG. You know, there's not a lot of lore or backstory to these games, so you really have to make considerable leaps in logic and developing this world that may not have much to go off of. And like, sometimes it works with Superstar Saga having a pretty good and grounded world, and other times you get Sticker Star. I'm just aiming for low-hanging fruit. I haven't played many of the Paper Mario games past the Wii, so like, if you're the Sticker Star fan out there, I'm sorry, and you can email me at thiswebzone. Having recently gone through the earliest games in the Mario franchise, I feel like I'm at the perfect position to give this RPG a chance. Putting this whole world and franchise into a new medium like this feels like a water and oil situation. You don't want to lean too heavily on the RPG side and alienate the Mario fans that maybe only wanted something whimsical. At the same time, you don't want to make it too baby-proof and push away the RPG fans that like to roleplay as accountants for fun. I'm sorry, I don't want to pull out my abacus to determine the correct stat weight for how much damage Bowser's ass will do. I'm sorry. Alright, I've stalled long enough, mainly to make sure Mario isn't about to beat my ass for dropping the sword on Bowser's castle. But hey, have you heard of the 100 sub button challenge? Apparently you can only hit that button 99 times. It's almost impossible to get 100. So that should keep you busy until I get back from the transition. Wait, does 100 button, is it, you hit 100 times, is that unsubscribe? Oh, I didn't think this joke through, shit. Gonna be honest with you right off the bat, the combination of Mario and RPG, even having played later games influenced by this one, feels wrong. How do you pitch the idea of this portly powerhouse as the star of a 20+ hour, story-driven, stat-filled role-playing game? Well, apparently that's what the people at Square were trying to figure out too. Chihiro Fujioka, the director of the game, explained in Family Computer magazine, "Our answer was it's a Mario RPG, which means an RPG featuring the things that only Mario can do. Jumping, dashing, and so forth." And I mean, sure, that sounds right on paper, but surely they mean they're gonna adapt Mario to an RPG in unique ways. I mean, I'm sure they're not gonna just give Mario special attacks that are literally just jumping or stuff like that, right? Oh... Alright, I'm just joking around. Adapting the relatively simple gameplay of Mario and putting it into the more difficult and tactical gameplay of an RPG is a near Sisyphean task. And while Fujioka goes on record saying it was an exciting challenge, I can't imagine the sheer creative leaps they had to make over and over just to get this all working in some way or another. And as fun as that sounds, wow, that must have had some sleepless nights in the office. Like, sure, it sounds like a really easy cop-out to make Mario's main attack just jumping on an enemy's head and leaving it at that. And if this was 2024 Nintendo we were talking about with some of the definitely questionable Mario third-party slop, I don't think anyone would be shocked to see that they went with that angle. But this is 90s Nintendo nearing the release of the Nintendo 64. They are snorting all of the Stardust and dropping that thwomp right on the gas pedal. Psst, the Stardust is still cocaine. In my whole playthrough of Mario RPG, I tried my best to figure out how to describe the combat. Deceptively simple, yet constantly engaging, with all the trappings of a traditional RPG on top. But that's too wordy and too boring, so I tried to come up with a simpler, funnier way to explain it. And ultimately I gave up on that too and decided the best shorthand was this. It's Final Fantasy mixed with rhythm game elements. I know that's not helping to make the unholy alchemical creation of Mario and RPG sound any more appealing, but it's clear, even if you hadn't read any interviews on the topic like I had, that Nintendo and Square really didn't want this to just be another RPG on the market. Sure, you could coast by just choosing the various commands you have in your menu and letting them play out, But that's stupid and dumb and bad. You're bad and you're making Miyamoto cry if you play the game like that. Stop it. At the most basic level, not even looking at the overall party roster, combat is shockingly engaging and interactive. It's so simple too, just adding button prompts at a specific point in the character's animation window for extra damage. But in that simplicity, it adds so much to grab the player's attention for almost the entire game. Alright, be honest with me. How many times in an RPG have you just been mashing away at the menu commands at the end of the game just because you're so tired of combat? I know you have. I know you got damaged in the middle of a fight just because you're mashing through a fight. I know you have, because everyone does it. At a certain point, at a certain level, enemies become just meat to throw into the XP grinder. Very, very few RPGs have an engaging combat system all throughout that keeps the player engaged. And yet here, even up until the very end when I was grinding for extra levels before doing a certain extra boss, I enjoyed every moment of the basic fights. Every attack, every buff, every heal, everything has some sort of sweet spot timing that gives you just a little bit extra. I'd say my one gripe with combat reactions is, when defending, it's really hard to know when exactly to react. There were times where I felt like it was impossible or unnecessary to try and hit the button to defend myself because I never knew if it would work. While I knew all of my attacks and the sweet spots that would boost them, it felt like I was taking a gamble whether or not I would be able to defend. I think my favorite attack overall though is when you give Bowser the Hurley gloves and his basic attack just becomes tossing Mario. And if you hit the timing correctly, he catches and yeets him for a second time as an all-powerful meatball missile. Attacks just feel fun and rewarding, making every combat encounter, no matter how big or how small, feel like a test of both the character strength and your knowledge of the attack timings. Nothing makes you feel more powerful than an encounter with one enemy and you just turn him into a smear into the pavement in one turn. What did you think was gonna happen, little guy? It's not like every character has the same timing or attack. Again, they could have gone the more generic route, have every character have the same animation and the same basic attack, but they took the task of making a Mario-focused RPG really, really seriously. In more ways than one, I am going to have nightmares about vines for the rest of my life. Aside from special attacks, each character gets their own unique weapons, each with their own timing and animations. Mario attacking an enemy with a shell has a different feeling than Geno dislocating his arm and firing bullets. Though they might serve similar purposes, being the most basic attack, they never quite feel the same. There's something uniquely fun getting a new weapon and knowing you get to learn new timings. Obviously similar weapons will have similar windows, like Mario's shells all have around the same timing. But characters like Geno and Toadstool, who have unique weapons, add to the fun of learning combat. Figuring out the proper timings for each of Geno's weapons is a rewarding way to make the player feel like they have more control over the combat. It's such a simple thing to add this interactivity to the combat, but it goes a long way to make the wanted player engage in the fights. Like, the beginning of the game, I think I pretty much cleared this entire forest's ecosystem out. But I mean, it's not illegal, it was just for experience points. There's no law against that. For my private FBI officer listening and watching me make this video, that was a joke. Mario did all those, not me. Go find him. Considering how short this RPG is, I'm not upset at the total party members. Even in some of my favorite RPGs, they often overload the player with party members, some with overlapping positions. Because of that, it's inevitable that party members get neglected over time as you get more and more characters to juggle. Trying to figure out how to slot every single character into the party, making sure that they're all up to date with the right equipment and skills, it can become a daunting task. For a lot of players, they start to create parties that cover all angles and ignore slotting anything that might change that up. Why have parties with 2 mages or 2 melee fighters when you never know what challenges the next dungeon will have? Look, sorry Ryuji, Yusuke just does so much more damage than you do. I gotta replace you. You're being replaced by a broke, starving art student with a mall katana. Somehow, his malnourished arms just hit harder than the delinquent track star. Thanks, Atlas. An RPG like Octopath Traveler, a game I really do love, gives you a lot of options when it comes to your party makeup and your composition. But because of the way the game works, making you exploit the weaknesses of every enemy, it leads to a lot of planning and switching. And while you want the player to have a lot of agency in the choices that they make and the party that they've built, if you give them too many options, it can become really paralyzing. If Mario RPG was like 100 hours long and they just kept spreading party members all throughout the game, I don't think I would enjoy it nearly as much. It's why something like the simple combat in Mario and Luigi games works so well, because it doesn't try to offer too many choices to the player. If they were giving you like so many abilities throughout the whole game as well as 8 party members you had to juggle, it would be overwhelming. The only major choices that Mario RPG ever asks you to make are the extra points you get after you level up. Even then, it's not that big of a choice, mainly choosing between either your power, your health, or your specials. Each character falls into their own archetype with what they're best at, but I could see playing around with the level up system to create your own versions of the team. I mean, by the end of the game, I basically had a tank healer Peach who took almost no damage from anything. For a game that's, in all honesty, relatively basic with its systems, there's enough depth that I could see people having their completely different but totally viable pirate— fuck, I almost saved it. For a game that's, in all honesty, relatively basic with its systems, there's enough depth that I can see people having completely different but totally viable party combinations. I set Mario up to be my main damage dealer, pretty much pumping every single level up into his power. Was that the best option? Probably not. He was getting rocked in later fights, so he kind of became my main glass nuke. Considering he was the one character that always needed to be in the party, it felt like the best decision if I kept him alive. Watching his basic attacks do 500 damage plus on bosses made my cannoli extra large, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, it's a pretty large cannoli. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to eat this. Fuck it. Early on, I wasn't sure how much I was gonna like Mallow because I figured he was going to end up being the glass cannon of the group. He wasn't super strong on early encounters, though he did have some moments in boss fights with ads. He has a good single target heal, but I knew Toadstool would end up being the real healer down the line. I just wasn't sure how often I'd keep him in the party. The moment I really understood how jacked this little puffball was on the pirate ship. We ain't letting you through? Wrong. Thunderbolt. Like Mario, I dumped all of Mallow's extra points into one specific stat. His special stat. And I couldn't foresee the ramifications of my actions, but when I did, I couldn't go back. I created an AoE nuke monster. One use of his Thunderbolt, an ability with such a small flower point total, I could use it in every single fight and still have some left over for the boss ahead. This is the face of death. This is the face of a creature who has seen the light leave the eyes of hundreds. He harnesses the power of gods and smites any who get in his way. And I empowered him. I hooked this little fluff ball up to jumper cables and I let him loose on the world. God help us all. Bowser ended up pulling a similar role to Mario, just with a more tank focus. I didn't care a whole lot for his specials. His poison ability was okay, and the Bowser Crusher just ended up being a decent AoE if I didn't have Mallow or Geno on hand. But overall, he ended up being another basic bruiser with a much bigger health and defense pool. Even if he didn't hit nearly as hard as Mario, when they were in the party together, basically everything died in 2 turns max. One thing I do appreciate is how most of his specials involve bringing in members of his army to assist him. In a lot of Bowser outings, they try to rightfully show off his solo strengths, which is fine. But I also like the interpretation of him being strong and being able to summon his army to help back him up. Just one of those neat little personality touches that come through in the gameplay. You know, I keep writing Peach in the script because that's obviously who this character is supposed to be, but I'm trying to be as accurate to the game as possible, so I'm rewriting it to Toadstool. If there's any instances of me calling her Peach by accident, that's why. Fuck you, Nintendo. I was curious how they were going to adapt Toadstool into an RPG, considering the only games she wasn't carried around like a sack of potatoes were, what, Mario Bros. 2 and Mario Kart? Up to this point, she's always kind of been the damsel in distress, but they had to create something for her to use in combat. You guys ever played Super Princess Peach? Remember the Vibe Scepter? Yeah, daily Vibe Scepter check in your mom's room. If you know, you know. It makes sense that she would end up being another magical special user like Mallow. While I like the interpretation from Smash Bros. Where she has this deceptive strength, I think Mario RPG still gets a good balance between the elegant magical princess archetype and the tough girl who can handle herself. I love that her strongest weapon that you can get is just a frying pan, somehow very fitting and stupid silly just to be able to slap the shit out of Smithy with it. I mainly use Toadstool as a bulky healer like I mentioned before. Giving her the lazy shell armor and the safety pin made it so she was essentially invincible. If she was alive, the others in the party could just focus on beating the shit out of whatever enemy had dared to stand before our queen, the princess. Unless she got hit by a one-hit KO attack, but we don't talk about those. Oh, she also just has like a special attack where she chucks an insane number of bombs. It's like just an obscene amount of bombs that no one person should be able to carry on them. I think she and Samus should compare their arsenals, if you know what I mean. Moving on. Finally, we have the character that's so beloved from this game that people have basically made him the poster child for the entire game. Geno, the puppet carried totally by his design and absolutely nothing else about him. Is that enough of an inflammatory statement for someone to get actually mad at me? Hang on, let me put up the joke alarm so people know that I'm kidding. There it is. Is that enough? Everyone know that I'm joking? Everyone cool? I'm not gonna get canceled? It was a joke? Cool. I'll get into my real thoughts about Geno later, promise. But I had a really hard time figuring out where to slot him into the party. He didn't hit as hard or survive attacks nearly as well as Bowser, but his special attacks were more costly than Mallow's. While I could have used Geno Blast to take care of enemies, Thunderbolt did the same thing for cheaper. Obviously, I'm not saying that Geno was useless, he still hit like a truck late into the game, but when it came to having a cohesive party where each character had a role, it felt like I kind of had to force him to fit. Geno Boost was a game changer though. It was the only reason I put Geno into the party for the final boss. Mario Lazy Shell go. Then again, it's not like the game is terribly hard. For most of the game, I was worried that I was over-leveled for almost every single zone. When I would go into fights and rely on Mallow's Thunderbolt for the entire combat, I was worried I was just a little bit roided out. And it's not like I was grinding. I was clearing out rooms here and there because I was enjoying the combat, but I never went out of my way to get extra levels until I was getting ready for the secret boss. In almost every single session I played, I put down some sort of note about how I was worried that I was over-leveled for the zone I was in. I didn't lose a single character until like midway through the game when I was just trying to nuke down a boss and I wasn't paying attention to my health. Funny enough, the first character that died was Geno, further proving how much of an overrated and underpowered Pinocchio piece of shit. Between the extreme abundance of healing items as well as the general ease of the encounters, it took a long time before I ever really felt challenged. The first fight where I felt like I really had to sit up and lock in was the Axum Rangers, but even then, it wasn't because I felt like the encounter was tough. Most of the difficulty in any given fight for Mario RPG comes down to how many enemies are in the encounter and how many attacks those enemies get. It goes like this. If a boss fight has adds, you generally want to knock out the smaller guys first, then hard focus down the boss. Most of the bosses don't pose much of a threat on their own, save for like Smithy at the end of the game. Instead, a lot of the boss designs revolve around either adding more fodder to the fight to whittle down your health, or spamming major attacks to make up for the lack of meat shields. I think the reason the Axum Rangers stick out so much is because they're all mini-bosses that form a cohesive unit on their own. Each has their own unique strengths and skills in the fight that forces you to pick and choose which ones you take down. Do you take down Axum Pink, the one who heals and uses the most magic-based attacks? Or do you try and take down Red and Black first, since they're the heavy-hitting melee attackers? But the Axum Rangers are kind of an outlier when it comes to these sorts of fights. The only two fights that use the multi-target obstacles effectively are them and the secret boss Culex, and even then, he wasn't all that hard either. Yeah, I said it. I beat Culex in one go. I am officially over my skill issue. Hey, what about when you game over to Valentina? Shut up. My point is that when Mario RPG tries to make a difficult fight, it often resorts to just overwhelming you with a lot of enemies and forcing you to deal with a lot of attacks at the same time. One of the better bosses in the game happens to be Bowyer, one of the major bosses in the first half. While he relies more on a gimmick rather than being an outright difficult boss, it stuck out to me even as I got towards the end. It's the boss that introduces Geno and gives you a full party of 3 for the first time, so it makes sense that this is where there would be the first real major bump in difficulty. To compensate for that bump, they didn't simply add a ton of extra enemies for you to deal with or give Bowyer an insane amount of attacks. Instead, they gave his fight a gimmick that forced you to think on your feet about the next turn. At regular intervals, Bowyer can disable certain buttons from your command list and effectively hamper your strategy. Turning off your basic attack, disabling your use of items, making it so you can't use your abilities, it forces you to change up your tactics. It's still a pretty easy fight because Mario RPG is allergic to difficulty, but it made me stop and think of how a lot of the bosses could be changed to make them more engaging or difficult. A boss encounter like the big squid gauntlet on the sunken ship is pathetically easy for how it's trying to seem imposing. Maybe make it so each of the tentacles has its own unique mechanic you have to learn how to deal with before you get to the boss. Like, I don't know, one tentacle grabs your party member and keeps them out of the fight until you break it out. Or another tentacle constantly debuffs your party, so you have to decide which one is more important, getting a party member back or stopping the debuffs. So, just something like that. They sort of try to do something like this with Exor, the sword that I definitely didn't drop into Bowser's Castle. Each part of Exor's false face has different attacks that they can perform, and it's clear that they want you to attack the different features. Maybe make it so that each part takes time to charge up a certain attack and give the player the ability to choose which one they want to deal with first. Smithy's final form gets close to this, with his head changing form but his body also being targetable. I failed this fight the first time because I was just trying to take down the head's health bar before realizing that he gets more and more attacks the longer his body stays uninjured. So it became a balancing act of trying to take out the body, then focusing fire on the heads while I had the chance, giving the fight a really good give and take flow. I don't think anyone plays Mario RPG for the difficulty. I'm not trying to make this game like Bowser's Gate 3, where people are having sex speed runs to see who can get toaded into bed the fastest. But I still can't help but wonder, like, what kind of changes might have made the game just a little bit more imposing, have a little bit more teeth? Like, if I'm being honest with you, none of the actual difficulty came with the combat or encounters or anything like that. You wanna know where the real fucked up shit is? You wanna know where the real CBT in this game is? It's the platforming. That's where it's the roughest. Oh, they wanted to make a Mario RPG and they made the platforming bad. No wonder Miyamoto carpet bombed all the RPG out of Paper Mario. I'll talk more about the overall look of the game in a bit, since I'm just trying to get my thoughts out about the gameplay here. But I do like the isometric view of the game as opposed to something like the top-down dungeon scrolling perspective in older Final Fantasy games. It helps Mario RPGs stand out visually and allows for more unique gameplay design. After all, it's a Mario game. Taking away platforming would be like taking empty overworlds out of Ubisoft games. It's unfortunate that the isometric angles tend to make the platformings much more annoying. See, when developers create games in 3D, the question becomes, how do you make sure the player knows where they are? Most games don't have that big of an issue, keeping players grounded and giving them controls that makes it easy to traverse a 3D world. But platformers had a unique issue, making sure the player knew where they were landing, especially if they require precision. The solution? It was quite simple, something that many still use to this day. Just plop a little shadow underneath your character's position and boom, suddenly the player knows exactly where they are in relation to the platform. A game like Crash 4 even takes this a step further, adding a little glowing ring underneath the player that always keeps track of the player's position. Technically speaking, Mario does have like a circle underneath him when he jumps, but it's just... Alright, look, I'm just gonna come out and say it. So many of the sprites and shit like that in this game are ass. The perspective for so many of these platforming challenges is so bad, you would just... So many instances where you just jump and you overshoot things and it doesn't feel like it's your fault at all. And listen, I'll be the first person to blame my skill issue when I start to suck manicotti at a game. But every time I had an issue with the platforming, every single time I fell off a platform trying to jump, it wasn't my fault, okay? So many instances where it's impossible to tell where you are in relation to a sprite, and it's just like, couple that with really tight and unforgiving jumps, and you've created a platforming system that just feels like nails on a chalkboard. Like, the vine segment, the one that's mandatory to get up to the Cloud Kingdom to progress, there were so many times I would just jump at one of these vines, and I would jump perfectly, or at least I thought I felt like I was, and I'd go behind it. What the fuck? When I can't tell where these two swinging platforms are in relation to each other, you've made a platforming system that needs an overhaul. When I saw that there was platforming challenges at Bowser's Keep at the end, I was praying that I'd get the combat or the quiz encounters. At least I could actually rely on my memory and experience with the combat to get me through the game. But no, into fucked up perspective pits and dropping into lava, lose a bunch of your chances because the game keeps restarting you on a single pixel at the end of the platform and keep falling into the lava while you reposition yourself. Who made this? Which one of you was responsible for the platforming segment? No, I just won't talk. I just want to talk to the one responsible for the platforming segment. I'm definitely not about to drop a giant sword on your house. But I think if we're going back to the question of what would make an RPG feel like a uniquely Mario one, I gotta look beyond just the combat and platforming and all that. Sure, those are important, but I think the game offers so much more in the way of just pure, distilled fun that's impossible to ignore. Even late into the game, there's dozens of little mini-games to break up the generally engaging flow. I think even without these challenges, the game would have been perfectly fine. It's how they're handled that I think enhances the feeling of being a Mario RPG. Floating down a waterfall and collecting coins, jumping from barrel to barrel on a river, the game never lets you get too comfortable. Just when you think you're settling into the RPG grind and flow, boom, you're chasing a typical League of Legends player. This was the minigame I was the absolute worst at, like by far. I think I only caught up to Booster once, and he was just gunning it up that hill, man. I can't compete with this absolute specimen of a man. It's these minigames that add to the overall whimsy of this Mario RPG. Combat and writing was doing a good job at establishing the world, but the platforming was fermented anus. But these minigames more than make up for it. The section where you're climbing up a bunch of sky paratroopas feels like it's something ripped straight out of a Mario game. It's perfect. The minecart minigame though? Man, I've never felt more of like an Italian off my meds than playing that minigame right there, I'll tell you what.
Sammy, you are wrecking the car! Shut up!
There's a lot of ways that making a Mario RPG could have gone horribly wrong. There was always the easy solution, sprite swapping and making Final Fantasy Mario. At the same time, I don't think it would be as fondly remembered as it is today. It's the unique Mario elements that make the game so memorable and stand out against contemporary RPGs during that generation. Creating a more interactive combat system allowed for players to become skilled at the button timings, as well as letting them think critically about their skills. Each party member feels unique enough to earn their slot without having so many to choose from. The world itself feels distinctly Mario, with challenges and enemies that feel right at home in the Mushroom Kingdom. If the game simply let you traverse a Spirit Halloween-esque Mario overworld, it would feel hollow. And there's so much in the weeds that I didn't even bring up, barely talking how genius the flower point system feels, how equipping items can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. The game has so much under the hood that I could go on and on about every intricate detail. I think I've done a good overview about how I feel about the game itself. It's one that shouldn't exist, but at the same time, I don't know if I'd want to be in a world where it doesn't. I can see and feel every influence used in the future for games like Paper Mario and the Mario & Luigi series. But I'm not done yet. Oh no, there's so much more I want to talk about, and it's time to get a little goofy with it. I've mainly just been talking about how the game plays, the general systems, all the mechanical aspects, but there's so much more to it than just that. There is so much in this game that just skyrockets it into an RPG of its own league. Buckle up, because there's going to be at least one joke about my colorblindness, and you'd better laugh. Please understand, I've been listening to the Mario RPG soundtrack while I've been writing the script, and I only just now made the connection that Yoko Shimomura also wrote the Kingdom Hearts OST. Like, I think I knew that at one point, but it just kind of clicked when I was writing this paragraph. There's nothing really I wanted to say about that, it means I have an excuse to listen to Kingdom Hearts music again. I don't remember a whole lot of the gaming landscape before the swap to 3D. Genesis was my 16-bit console of choice, but my playtime was dominated by Sonic. By the time I was really cognizant enough to play games on my own, I was playing Spyro on the PS1 and Rayman 2 on the N64. Did anyone else ever get scared of being on the pirate ship in Rayman 2? I remember getting terrified for some reason about going up this staircase, and I always restarted the game when I got here. Because of that lack of experience, I continue to be blown away by the way these NES and SNES games present themselves. Like, goddamn, they're just feasts for the eyes and ears, art in its purest and unrestrained form. I don't think that there's been a single game in the I've Never series so far that I haven't, at the very least, enjoyed the presentation. Even Zelda 2, for as much as I dog on it, looks and sounds amazing for the majority of its run. Don't even get me started on Metroid 2, I'm still trying to reconcile with the fact that everything I thought I knew about the Game Boy was a lie. All of this is just to say that, to nobody's surprise, Mario RPG is a feast for the senses through and through. When you've got the dream team of Nintendo and Square, both at the height of their power in the 90s, you're going to get levels of peak that haven't been reached nearly since. Like, you look at the release dates, and it's sandwiched between Chrono Trigger and then Final fucking Fantasy VII. If that's not a company at the top of their game, I don't know what is. They were firing on all fucking cylinders, and the collaboration of Nintendo and Square, oh, it is just... it's insane to think about in retrospect. If only they knew what 30 years in the future would bring. Psst. It's more cocaine. I mentioned the isometric view before in the gameplay section, how it made me want to forcibly bald myself with the platforming. While I feel like it's a detriment to some of the actual gameplay and progression, I can't deny that it does something magical for the art style. From the sprites to the world itself, everything being on this little slant makes the whole world feel just a little bit more whimsical. Climbing a mountain and delving into the depths of some mine, swimming in the ocean and boarding a sunken, haunted ship, the whole world feels like a giant playground. Every zone is unique with music and art assets to match, even if some of the art can definitely get a little muddy when you look at it too long. I'm looking at you, Barrel Volcano. I fell off your platforms more than a few times because of how much the colors bled in my special eyes. They're not broken. I'm the one that sees the world correctly. The rest of you are wrong. The best way I can describe it is that the game feels like I'm playing a diorama. Each of the characters look like little dolls in that diorama, and you pilot them around from scene to scene. It feels as if someone scanned in some Mario playsets from the 90s and turned them into the game's zones. I'm sure most people played with toys in that sort of way where you mix and match all the characters you had and made all these silly stories with them. I used to have Sonic toys meet up with Transformers and the Ninja Turtles and have this big battle between all of them. Wait, Hasbro, call me. I have the next great idea for your Transformers movie series. I kind of came to that conclusion midway through the game when you first meet Johnny and then afterwards when you meet Yardovich. Many of the bosses feel like they exist from a whole different franchise. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's not that they have a hard clash like Culex does. Culex is an intentional clash of styles as an Easter egg, whereas all of Smithy's gangs are characters that are meant to seriously be part of the world. But I couldn't put my finger on why a lot of Smithy's gang just felt weird every time they popped up. But when I eventually came to that diorama and toy conclusion, the analogy finally clicked. Smithy's gang invading the Mushroom Kingdom is that feeling of pulling in toys from a completely different franchise, placing them as villains, having them face off with Mario and company. It feels like the perfect encapsulation of playing with toys as a kid. Of course it makes sense that Darth Vader is having a duel to the death with Shadow. Stop trying to step over my carefully curated lore. Now, obviously I'm not trying to suddenly be like, game theory, is Mario RPG just a kid playing with toys? Rest in peace, MatPat. Mwah. But more so, there's a comfortable, cozy feeling that you get when you start up this game and every time you play it. Even though I had never touched the game, I felt this familiar sensation of like playing with toys as a kid. Every bit of the game's presentation serves to fit this feeling of comfort and familiarity. If I'm being totally honest with you, a lot of the story takes a backseat to the overall adventure going on. Normally I might have a problem with this, feeling like all the scenarios don't really have any connecting threads. And while I do feel that way technically, I don't think that it detracts away from the quality of the game. Every zone has those loose threads of having a star piece to hunt, with the eventual goal of repairing the Star Road. And while that usually serves as a vehicle to get from place to place, I usually forgot about the star piece until the party collected it at the end. I was too busy enjoying all the little places that Nintendo and Square cooked up for Mario and company to visit. Like, of course you're going to make an entire town out of moles be like a big mining town in the mountain. That just makes too much sense. And they're pretty good adaptations of the Monty Mole character, considering he only had, what, 2 different sprites in Mario World? I think they did a pretty good job at building out a world. While they tend to use Toad a little bit too much early on in the game, each town still feels pretty unique with their own story going on despite having similar vibes. The people of Rosetown and the Seaside Village have completely different vibes than the city of the people who just wanna get hitched. They wanna get to that honeymoon phase real fast, don't they? They are way too excited for this marriage. I love each town for their personalities, with none feeling quite the same as another. The little Toad towns had the same overall aesthetics, but between the music and the character writing, they set themselves apart. Then later, when you get to a town full of monsters that you fought through the whole game, it's a genius idea that I wish more games would play with. Being able to talk to enemies that you've met through your whole time with the story, it's just such a cute idea. Hey, I know that guy! I know that guy! He makes me go to therapy because of his second game! But when it comes to the moment-to-moment concrete story beats, it feels like the game fast-forwards through a lot at points. By the time you even get to acknowledge the existence of a villain, a lot of times they're dead within 10 to 15 minutes. Mac, Yardovich, the Axum Rangers, they all have this problem where they don't get much time to develop. And I mean, I know that Smithy and his gang really don't need deep motivation or backstory, just like we don't need to know Mario's personal feelings on every new development of the story. That's not to say that there's not a lot of emotional moments or stakes to the overall plot. There's a lot of character moments that add deeper elements to these characters. Bowser is, shockingly, one of the more complex characters in the entire story, and he's like a goofball for 90% of the runtime. I can't help but love this giant marshmallow of a turtle trying to be this cool and tough dude, but he gets upstaged at almost every single chance. Why are you looking at me like that? Each character gets a moment to shine that allows them to take center stage. Some tend to get more than others, and obviously Mario's the main attraction, but there's never any moment where I felt like any character was getting overshadowed. I do think it's just a consequence of having a smaller party, continuing to justify why that was a good decision. Having to juggle more and more party members and stories would inevitably lead to many losing relevance later. Translating Mario to an RPG's combat style was one hurdle, but translating him to an RPG's story and writing was a different beast entirely. Excluding things like cartoons and movies, Mario's probably had a collective 4 paragraphs total of actual words throughout the years. Personally, I've always been partial to the Italian gibberish that they used in the Mario and Luigi games. It's so charming. Do you risk giving Mario full sentences, potentially creating a strained disconnect for the big fans? As fun as the 1993 Mario movie is, it feels like it's Mario in concept only. The cartoons are good too, but I've always felt like they portrayed a more gruff and less whimsical version of the character. Not that that's a bad thing. Listen, I'll never get tired of hearing Vinny Vinesauce's Mario and Luigi impressions.
Wait, what?
But I don't know if that version of the plumber would fit an RPG. So instead, they decided to make Mario into this little gremlin, a maniacal force of nature that is not to be trifled with. That's not a joke. He could have just been this stoic, static character that was used for the player's avatar, but no, they turned him into this little fucked up, crazy little duende. He plays perfect charades to the point where he can just transform into someone else to impersonate them. He is so ready to fight at all times. He is looking for a fight against everyone. He squares up against a child ready to deck him in the face. Mario, no! I'm convinced that this isn't Mario. This is Maurice. I think Mallow and Bowser get equal billing with their importance to the story. Each one has proper stakes as to why they're following Mario, and their presence really adds to many scenes. The story would be far weaker if these two weren't main characters, though I wouldn't say that it reaches quite the same level as other Square RPGs. I chalk that up to the runtime rather than the game having any quality issues with the writing itself. Mallow probably has the most personal story in the whole game, giving him the motivation of finding his real family. It's pretty obvious to the player what Mallow's story will be, even when you first meet him, considering he thinks he's a frog. And trust me, I've seen a fair few frogs in my day, alright. I know it ain't easy being green. Though it's a little fucked up that Frog Fuchsius just immediately drops that Mallow was adopted when Mario comes into the picture. Now, Mallow, I know we look nothing alike and you're in your 20s, but you're not my fucking son. Get out of my house and find your real I am tired of paying for the house over your head. Also, Mallow gets like the most threatening level up screen I've ever seen. Like, oh my god. Mallow learns psychopath is a phrase and an image that's going to be burned into my memories for the rest of my existence. It should have been the warning sign that he was going to be a destructive little bastard. I briefly mentioned Bowser before, but I think it bears repeating how much of a cream puff he really is here. I love how as a species we've all just decided that it's funnier to have the big bruiser tough guy characters be goofballs on the inside and roll with it. Of course, that doesn't downplay the powerhouse that Bowser is. He's still a force to be reckoned with, but it adds so much to his character when you add that pathetic wet cat sort of layer to him. He just really wants Toadstool's love, okay? He would be the most down bad tier 3 sub in all of internet history. He debates whether or not he's actually going to help because he thinks he has a chance to finally get with his goth. Why was it goth? I'm projecting at that point. He literally debates whether or not he's going to help save the entire kingdom if it means he thinks he has a chance with his e-girl waifu. She won't love you, Bowser. You have to move on. Keep your chin up, King. I guess of everyone in the cast, Toadstool sort of gets the short end of the stick. She's got some funny scenes for sure. She's often used for more comedic effects rather than serious story moments. It's just that much of her more serious involvement begins and ends with the booster section. It's a great section, honestly it might be my favorite part of the game for how goofy and Mario it all feels, but I can't shake the feeling it was one of those Mario mandates for the story. They didn't have to kidnap Toadstool again. She's had multiple games getting kidnapped by this point, we could have gone without it. But it feels like this was a moment where, and obviously I can't confirm or anything, but someone came in and said that Toadstool needs to get kidnapped. I'm obviously not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but someone probably said that Toadstool getting kidnapped was a mandatory part of the Mario story. Man, it sure is a good thing that they moved away from this plot 20 years after this game came out. It sure would be weird if they still had this plot going on a lot in the games, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Alright, it's controversial opinion time. You gotta keep your finger on that sub button. You never know how spicy it's gonna get. We have one character left to cover, and it's arguably the character people love the most from this game. He's the one character people won't shut the fuck up about after 30 years of only existing in one title. You know him, you love him, put your hands together for legally distinct Pinocchio! Yes, I know Pinocchio is public domain, I'm just being a shitter for a joke, please. Please don't unsubscribe, please! Alright, listen, jokes aside, I think Geno is interesting. His design alone could get him into his own mascot franchise. It's surprising that they never tried to do anything with this character again, or that Nintendo or Square never tried to do something new. A great design like this can carry an entire franchise, just look at the Sonic games. He's cool enough for the gamers that think anything that's not hyper-realistic is for babies, but soft enough that he's not off-putting for the younger audience too. Essentially what I'm saying is that he is the Shadow the Hedgehog of the Mario universe. Where I find issues with Geno is just... Look, again, I know, it's a Mario RPG. I'm not looking for the emotional depth of Chrono Trigger or a Final Fantasy game. I'm not here for the emotional character moments that are going to destroy me for the rest of my life. But I don't know, when you hear about a character for 30 years, it's like... you kind of learn to expect something kind of cool, other than just... eh. The way that Geno is written feels a little all over, and I can't tell if that's just a limitation of how much they could fit into the chat boxes, or an intentional decision. From his design and animations, they try to make him seem like this mysterious, cool loner type character. But often when he speaks or acts, he feels like he's a bunch of different characters in one. Sometimes he's brash and angry, flying off the handle when enemies push back. Other times he's calm and stoic, acting more like the guiding star or sage for the party. Aside from his introduction and occasional moments of pointing the party in the right direction, Geno doesn't take center stage too often. Obviously he's important, it's his job to repair the Star Road and find all the star pieces, but when it comes to the moment-to-moment events, the journey that the party takes, he falls into a spot like Peach where he only does bit comments from time to time. Do I still like Geno? Yeah, I think he's a great party member, but he's still just... I guess I just don't see the same character that people have been begging to get into Smash for such a long time. I think he's cool, but I guess I've just come to expect something more from Geno. I wasn't expecting anything crazy with his character, but he's mainly just kind of a flat piece of wood. It would take a lot for them to make me really see the crazy reverence people have for Geno. I mean, it's not like he's going to have some sort of big character sacrifice, or he's going to die at the end of the game or anything. Alright, for as smug and smartassy as I've been, Nintendo and Square clearly did something right. I'm not too tough of a guy to admit that Geno returning to the stars got me. Even if, in retrospect, I can't say that I remember a whole lot of things that Geno contributed to the events of the story, he leaves an impression. And when he's gone, when they're going through the final scenes of all the characters, you can't help but notice his absence. It's in that moment that I realized the appeal and the reverence for Geno. It's not that he was spectacularly deep or insanely unique, it's more that he made his mark on the Mario franchise, leaving a lasting impression with the way that he played, his design, his presence, and then he was gone. For almost 30 years until the remake, Geno only existed in one game on the SNES, and one game on the Game Boy Advance if you count that, but shh. I can see why the people who played this game as a kid would want this recognition for a long-forgotten character that's just left back in the SNES era. As the resident apologist for Chip from Sonic Unleashed, I understand how it feels to have a character that you like that it seems like they've just been forgotten. I mean, Chip is like the living personification of nails on a chalkboard, but I still like him, damn it. Honestly, even the enemies you face feel just as charming as the main cast. Again, they had one hell of an uphill struggle having to create an entire RPG roster. Of course, there's gonna be some recolors and rehashes later into the game, that's to be expected, but honestly, even up until you fight Smithy, there's a shocking amount of unique enemies to face off against. Obviously, you're gonna have your usual suspects like Goombas, Koopas, Cheep Cheeps, Bob-Ombs, all the usual things you'd expect to see in a Mario game. Though I'm gonna have to put my nerd glasses on here and say, you can't jump on or attack a Boo through normal means. You usually need special items like stars or unique power-ups. Boy, I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder. But it's the enemies created for Mario RPG that give the game so much of its charm, because holy shit are there some insane members of the roster here. Obviously, all the bosses stick out due to their weapon theme. I honestly loved how unique they use the weapons to form these characters. But even beyond that, you've got like robots, magical creatures, living cakes, and fucking ghosts. You know, they brought this enemy back for the remake, and like, he's still someone free him. Free the gorilla. In general, a lot of the enemies you face range from the normal to the really creepy and cool like the Zombone to everything in between. And again, it's another one of those instances where they could have just not rocked the boat too far and used basic enemies from the Mario series to fill in the gaps, and I realize that I've been talking about the later Paper Mario games now. Of course, the best boss in the game is Valentina. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm gonna go turn to the camera and go awooga and go like, oh, wood. And you're right. I am. To Dodo. Because Dodo is a good boy. He does not deserve the treatment he got from Valentina, and I love him. Alright, I've waited long enough to talk about this, but I can't ignore this phenomenal soundtrack. You know, some games have one or two songs that become iconic, one or two levels or battle themes that stand out on their own. Other games have pretty good songs all throughout, but nothing that really gets talked about on its own too often. And then there are games like Mario RPG that just have banger after banger after banger. If you asked me to tell you what game had the best soundtrack, I think I'd be hard-pressed not to pick this one. Almost every single song is iconic and memorable, impossible to forget how good they are. The battle theme and victory music are so fucking catchy, and they better be considering how you'll hear them from the start to the end. I never once got tired of hearing the music after a fight because it just made me want to dance along. Yes, I have seen the Hotel Transylvania meme with this song in it a million times. Why do you ask? Every zone is elevated by the soundtrack, enhancing and coupling together with the visuals to make each area feel special. You get a completely different vibe from wandering around in the pipe maze than when you step into Rose Town for the first time. And if the music wasn't as powerful and perfect as it was, if they went for a more traditional RPG flair, a lot of that impact would be lost. A boss fight in Mario RPG isn't just a boss fight because they're unique and harder to kill. They're set up with boss music that puts them into the league of their own. This isn't just another Goomba or Ghost on the way here, this is an enemy that you have to take seriously or get fucking demolished. And the music, while still whimsical in its Mario styling, makes sure you feel their importance and threat. Except Dodo. Dodo is a marshmallow. I love Dodo. He can't do anything wrong. People don't remember the Forest Maze for being fun or super innovative. They remember it because it has one of the best songs in the whole game. There's no one out there going, oh yeah, my favorite part of Mario RPG is walking around the Forest Maze because the gameplay is amazing. No, it's because they're bouncing around to the music like a little gnome. I genuinely can't think of a single song on the soundtrack that I would think is even subpar. In an interview with Square Enix Music Online, Yoko Shimomura cites Mario RPG as one of the major turning points in her life, and while I know her more for the Kingdom Hearts series, I can't deny the impact that this game and its music had on the overall industry. But hey, maybe we change up that sad frog music that plays every time there's a really sad moment. Like, I can't take any moment with that song playing seriously between all the memes I've seen and just how goofy that song sounds. I'm sorry. It's funny. You can add the sad frog music to the background of almost anything, and it instantly becomes really fucking funny. I feel like I gas up a lot of these SNES games and how amazing and important they are, and sometimes I reconsider what I say. Am I being too hyperbolic? Does it feel like I'm just pandering to an audience that already likes these games? But sometimes, most of the time even, I realize how much fun I had, how memorable the experience was. Sure, I get a little hyperbolic about these games sometimes because haha funny, but I think there's something about this one that brings out the honest, earnest emotions. Video games are an art form. And even more than just the actual gameplay itself, I think Mario RPG itself is art. It's an entire package of sights and sounds, of gorgeous locations and beautiful, iconic music. Everything it puts forward in its presentation, from the way that the characters act to the enemies, enhances the experience to the point where, if you were to change even a single thing about them, I think you'd lose too much of that charm. Alright, I'll stop kissing this game's ass now. I'm starting to get too broad with my comments about it anyway. I'm keeping you all from the parade, and who doesn't love a good parade? Whee! I've thought for a long time what makes an RPG, any RPG really, fun. For some, it's that feeling of growth, letting your characters and party level through combat and challenge. For others, it's the story, finding a long, engaging narrative with characters that they can get attached to. And I'm sure that there's another dozen reasons out there why you might love an RPG of any sort, even if you just play Xenoblade 2 for the art. Note, this is a joke. I just think that some of the Xenoblade 2 designs are really, really funny to drop on someone in the middle of a Discord conversation with no context. By all accounts, by all happenstance, Mario RPG is a game that should not exist. Furthermore, it is a game that should not be as good as it is. The question of what makes an RPG uniquely Mario almost feels like the start of some weird joke. It's not bad. Yeah, you give him the salami blade, and give him the gabagool glove. That makes him OP late into the game. Be able to beat every boss. This is a really dusty ass hat. I sneezed like 5 times getting this hat out. I don't know what it is about Square and Square Enix after their corporate merge from hell, but they love taking the strangest, most out there concepts for RPGs and turning them into gold. Mario RPG, Kingdom Hearts, the one time they made a game with the singer from Limp Bizkit. Bullshit. Every time people make jokes about these insane, impossible crossovers, somehow they defy expectations and make something remembered decades later. And while today's Square Enix is mostly known for indoctrinating people into Final Fantasy XIV, a CEO trying to push AI, and NFTs in 2024, there was a magic to the games that Square made. Mario RPG may not be the greatest RPG out there, but it's certainly one of the most fun games I have ever played. It's an experience that is, without exaggeration, magical the first time through it. Hearing iconic songs for the first time in context, facing off against bosses, and experiencing an incredibly funny and charming story, everything falls together to make a near-perfect game. If someone had told me that they didn't enjoy RPGs, or that they hadn't played many of them, I think recommending Mario RPG is a no-brainer. And what makes the recommendation easier is that now that there's a remake for people to get a hold of the game even easier. I debated putting in a section where I'd compare the original to the remake since I've been playing it on my own while working on the video. And I decided as I was playing it, the more I realized that it was a perfect companion, possibly even a substitute to the original, that you don't need to force two kings to fight each other. While the visuals have changed and there's plenty of quality of life improvements to the overall game, deep down it still has all the same DNA that made the original so great. So much has been left untouched from the original game's release that it's just a testament to how strong the base really was. There's no joke at the end of it. These games are just phenomenal. I joked at the beginning of the video about another popular mascot that did in fact have an RPG during the Nintendo DS era. Sonic tried his hand once and only once at an RPG, and it came out, well, you know that smell when someone tries to reheat fish in a microwave? Yeah, that's the equivalent of Sonic Chronicles. But playing Mario RPG makes me wish that they'd try again so desperately, create something uniquely Sonic with a much higher quality. The team behind Mario RPG years and years ago knew what elements of Mario to include and which to avoid. And while they ruined the most iconic part of Mario with dog shit platforming, everything else here is a perfect distillation of Italian role-playing. It's hard to consider what they might add that wouldn't completely upset the perfectly curated balance that they somehow found in their first attempt. And while I know that there's no real direct sequel to Mario RPG, this game would pave the way for new RPGs to find their own time in the spotlight and carve out their own identity. Of course, the split of what kind of Mario RPG you can play eventually becomes, do you want flattening kink or straight up Bowser vor? So maybe we went a little too far.